So when you think about what you're trying to do online with yourself as an enlightened entrepreneur, a creative business owner, you don't necessarily have to do both. I think that we're getting a little bit confused about this, to be honest, because I do think community has become very buzzy. It seems nicer if you're not, feeding your own ego by saying, I have a platform, I have an audience, I have a following, I have a list. Instead, they're saying things like, I have a community, but really that community is an audience, but they're saying that because they don't want to seem egotistical or be accused of wanting the attention. If you are a creative entrepreneur like myself, who knows that in order for your business to be successful, you need to be putting yourself out there, getting some attention, but do so like with slight reluctance and like a little bit of embarrassment, then this is a conversation for you. Let's be honest, a lot of us are not like, look at me, like, please, everyone, pay attention, be my follower. A lot of us are actually more like, I'm doing this because I want to get the positive outcomes of doing it. And one of the ways to go about making my own dreams come true is being brave and vulnerable and sharing myself and creating content and hopefully building an audience who likes it and connecting with other people who appreciate and understand what I'm putting out there. If that is you, because that's totally me, then I want to have a little chat. And what I want to talk about particularly is the difference between building a community and building an audience. Because I'm noticing a trend where people are using the same language interchangeably. They're saying following, audience, and community as if they are all the same. What I think this does consequentially is cause some people to do a lot more work than they really have to, as if they have an obligation to build communities around their business when they actually don't. Now, you may or may not know this, but I actually run two fairly large Facebook groups, so these are communities. And I have a long history of being a chronically online person who is really enthusiastic about online community building. I have friends all over the world from my many years, and we're talking all the way back to the time I was like 14 years old and got my first MacBook. I have built friendships and relationships with people that I've met online. That's kind of been my thing. That's what I would love to do all day, all the time. If the stars aligned and I could just be me, that would make me very happy. And it's a massive part of just who I am and how I interact with the world. For the first decade of my career, I was definitely trying to validate myself by getting attention online. And I was somewhat successful with that, building a following on Instagram. So I built audience for myself just because deep down inside, Brandy just could not get enough attention back then. And it is a little cringy to think back on, but I was somewhat successful at that as well. I definitely was an early adopter of Instagram, which allowed me to build an audience when it was just photos, okay? So if you remember when Instagram was just photos and you could build a following on Instagram by just being an Insta cute girl, like I would do that. I had different, fashion outfits, did photo shoots with photographers, like did all of the early Instagram girl stuff and built a small audience. This is like a micro audience compared to what some people have achieved on that platform. But having 10,000 followers on Instagram back then actually meant something. And I gained a lot of opportunities as a micro influencer. People would invite me to things. People would include me in things simply thinking I had some influence to then like move things along for them. So I had the experience of having an audience. And honestly, when I compare the two things and I think directly about the experience of them, the main difference between community building and audience building is this. The fact that when you are building an audience, you are kind of like an entertainer or a performer. I like to use the example of the stand-up comic. A stand-up comic, you might really like them. You may even feel like you have a parasocial relationship with them because you consume so much of their comedy. But when you're in a room with them as an audience member, you pay for the ticket and you watch the show. If you do have an interaction with them, they come down into the audience and maybe do some crowd work, but that's it. And it's not really an expectation of that relationship. You appreciate them as a creative, as an artist, as a personality, and you're happy being an audience member just there for the purpose of enjoying what they're doing. The difference then, if you think about a community, is when you're actually mingling or interacting with other people in the audience of, say, that stand-up comedian, because you all like stand-up comedy, or you're intentionally creating spaces where the intention isn't for you to be the person on the stage that everybody's watching, but rather the person who's connecting other people to each other, creating connections. You're bringing people together on a shared interest, something you have in common with each other. And for some people, interacting in community is more entertaining than being a observer or an audience member, because depending on somebody's personality type, some people want to be contributing as well, and they don't want to be anybody's follower or audience member. They see themselves as a contributor, and they thrive inside of communities where they are allowed to contribute as much as the community founder and host. So when you think about what you're trying to do online with yourself as an enlightened entrepreneur, a creative business owner, you don't necessarily have to do both. I think that we're getting a little bit confused about this, to be honest, because I do think community has become very buzzy. It seems nicer if you're not, feeding your own ego by saying, I have a platform, I have an audience, I have a following, I have a list. Instead, they're saying things like, I have a community, but really that community is an audience, but they're saying that because they don't want to seem egotistical or be accused of wanting the attention of many people who are following and clinging to the words of them. Being a thought leader or a personal brand or an influencer, all of those things are kind of feeling a little bit ick to a lot of people, and I think the use of the word community just makes it sound a little bit more holistic, but let's be honest, based on what we just talked about, that's not really what that is. Unless you have direct participation by the community founder, by the host inside of the audience itself, then it's not really a community. Or, and I would say there's instances where somebody hosts it, but they're not really expected to be in it or part of it. That's kind of like a hybrid model, but that usually requires a lot more involvement of other people, because basically the person's still creating a community or an audience around them, but they are also not one to come down and cross the lines and have relationships with that audience. Instead, they're going to have volunteers and admins and maybe people that they're actually employing to maintain that community, right? Sometimes a creator might create, for instance, a Discord server, or people might be really interactive with each other in the comments, but that host is facilitating that and creating that space for the people who are fans of them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are required to participate in that, or that they can do so very selectively, because they are still the figure that's brought all of these people together. One of my top pieces of advice for people who also want to build community is to go deep and think of a commonly felt problem or struggle that is relieved by the existence of peer support and community. So an example would be moms feel lonely. Therefore, there are many lonely moms. Perhaps we should have a community for moms who identify with being lonely. But that would be a very broad niche. So there might be something for instance, I'm neurodivergent, right? So I'm autistic. And so it might be autistic moms are lonely and have unique challenges being autistic as parents. So a group for autistic or neurodivergent moms is a valid concept, because they have something in common that is relieved by just having access to peers who struggle in the same ways. So that's kind of how you create a community premise. You think about a problem that is felt and also alleviated and or completely resolved by having access to other people who relate to that same struggle or problem. And then you build and found a community around that. And you are not the person on the stage in that scenario. Now, you might be an expert on that topic, either from your own lived experience or actual education and knowledge that you have collected through vast experience, but that doesn't mean that your community needs to be all about you and you need to be on all the time performing for that community. A lot of my communities, I just hang out with the people in the community, and I contribute as one of many contributors into my community. Now, I've been told that my communities are ran in a very special way that way, because I am very generous to the people who join in as members in my membership, and I say use my community as if you built it yourself, and I let them be co-hosts and experts. But that comes from a lot of years of experience knowing what works with these types of groups. And it also gives me something that I want even more, which is the freedom to not be constrained and forced to constantly produce new content, new things, and be the only person pushing engagement in my groups. That's just because I've learned over the years that the more you let other people take the stage and be involved, the less you have to have the burden of doing all the rear end heavy lifting to keep the thing alive. The more people feel like they have freedom to participate in it within like some, agreed upon rules that make sense for what the objectives of the community are, but giving other people the free reins to participate with you and not hanging on so tight and clinging for control is really when community culture begins to develop and people kind of thrive in that environment, especially if you're looking for people who are peers of yourself. Because if you have the need and desire to have access to that community and who also want to interact with people, share what you know, be contributing, not just consuming, there's other people out there who want that as well. I have learned to let go of any like control issues or trust issues that make me want to feel as if I have to be everywhere, like basically like God looking over my community, controlling every little thing. But that comes from a lot of experience of doing these types of collaborative things, because I definitely wasn't always like that. I used to think that everybody would at the end of the day blame me for everything, so I needed to control it and cling to it so tightly. And to be honest, I think we're going to see a lot more people taking this approach versus building an audience or a following. Because at this point in time, it's no longer cool to be somebody's follower. Like, nobody's going to admit to being a follower of anything. Because that kind of says I am a mindless drone buying and consuming whatever this influencer is throwing at me. And times have changed. We've become a lot more aware. We are in internet era, I don't know, version 5.0. The general public has become quite aware of all of the different like audience building and influencing and marketing tactics that used to work, largely because it was rare for somebody to have procured an audience for themselves. Previously, I think people who created content and built an audience had a lot more appreciation by the general public because it was still unique and rare to find. But these days, anybody who wants to can become a content creator. So the awareness of that, the fact that it's not very special or unique to be able to produce the content. Now, actually get people to watch is a whole other thing, but the general public now thinks to themselves, well, I could do that too. They don't really know all of the different intricacies of what goes on behind the scenes. They just know that it's a lot more attainable for any individual who wants to do it. And there's things now that have just become blatantly like cringy or like awkward about wanting to be seen or idolized by other people and platformed in that way. It's not everyone. Some people are still okay with it, but for the most part, a lot of the more self-aware, enlightened people are like over that. They do not want to be anybody's follower. And in fact, they're seeing value in themselves and what they can contribute, and what they're looking for instead are spaces where they can be seen as well. So that's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about talking about community building versus audience and follower growth. But at the end of the day, I think we have to have like kind of an entry point of understanding that if you want to build an audience, that's completely fine, and your business can be successful as a creative entrepreneur. Like, the business model has been proven, and you do not need to have a community component if that is not interesting to you. While also being aware that the option to build a community and not be the kind of on the stage, look at me, guru type creator for your ventures as a creative entrepreneur is also a option. And it creates a lot more opportunities for people like myself and maybe yourself who see themselves more as the inventor and the host and producer of events than they do the keynote speaker on the stage, wanting everybody to be looking directly at them. I enjoy this better than that, and I've had enough lived experience to know this about myself. And the awesome thing is, now people like me, maybe people like you, who see themselves more as a creator and imagineer curating an experience, more like a producer or a host versus being the keynote speaker on the stage, have just as much opportunity to be successful as creative entrepreneurs, because we can show up in the way that we prefer, which to others might be a little bit more introverted, and still succeed and build businesses using a community model instead of an audience building model. In my case, I've built these Facebook groups, and then I have a membership that people can pay me to utilize my Facebook groups for advertising. And that helps me do what I want to do, which is produce and create, versus having to always be on and be speaking to the audience, selling myself to sell things to that audience, and building the following that is specifically just for me. When I'm building my community, I'm recruiting people to come into the community who I think might enjoy the content that my other co-hosts are going to be putting in there. It's not just for myself. And for whatever reason, the way that I'm wired, I like that better. It makes me feel more mission oriented or of service to the greater collective of people in the world, to be building a community and like bringing people together under the shared ideas and interests that I have, so that they can all meet each other and we can all hang out and be happy together in these groups, versus creating a stage where everybody's looking up to me and I have to constantly serve that audience. But that's myself. And the purpose of this video is not to say that one way is better than the other or that there aren't hybrid models that exist. It's to explain that there is a difference. And if you're feeling pressure that you should be building an audience, but that audience should also be a community, and you're not quite sure how to go about that, I think that this is a good conversation for you to have with yourself as to how you want that to actually look and feel. Now, I do say to people, like, do not be a consumer, be a creator. If you are going to be online, you're going to spend your time on the internet creating and making things, whether it be like for a side business or you have a big business venture that you are trying to spread awareness of, being a creator is a better use of that time than just consuming some other guru's content. She says, ironically, as I'm asking you to watch this video until the end. But realistically, right, in order for there to be people who are succeeding as creators, there need to be people who are consuming creators' content. And I have found that if you create community, then you're also building trust actively with people, because there's something very impressive to be said about somebody who can kind of lead in this different type of way, where they're willing to give some of the attention to other people and instead are just very much intentional about making sure that community itself is a great place to be. More popular creators now that are popping off all over the place in all sorts of niches are figuring out how to kind of navigate this change and make their audiences feel like they're also part of a community. And the creators that people are resonating with now feel authentic and relatable, as if they are a friend who you're having a conversation with, not so much somebody who is better than you and condescending towards you, because I think we've had enough of that. I think we've all decided that doesn't make anybody feel good. And so they're shifting and paying attention to people that feel like, even if the creator themselves is not intentionally building a community, that they are part of a community by being part of that person's audience. So this is really something that I'm noticing as a shift in trend in online marketing as a whole. The creator economy and the online entrepreneur economy are all kind of trying to figure out how to navigate this change. What we do know, it is no longer cool to be chasing followers and wanting to build a massive audience just to elevate yourself. I think we've become a lot more evolved and conscious than that, and we know that the type of people who are motivated to do that, like they want to be famous and validated through this audience, praising them and telling them how great they are not necessarily the most reliable, consistent, or stable people. So now when people are looking to treat their attention as if it has value and choose to consume content from meaningful, substance-filled, relatable and genuine and authentic people, they are definitely being put off by anybody who seems that the only thing that they're motivated by is more validation, attention, money, and opportunities for themselves. So what do you think? Am I onto something with this? Share your thoughts. What do you think the difference between a community and a following is? Are you somebody like myself who spends way too much time online and kind of just feels the vibe of the tides that turn, and things are a little bit different now than they used to be, and there's tons of opportunities for different types of creative people to make their own way in this world and monetize themselves and their unique gifts. And it doesn't have to look like it ever looked before, because people now understand what this is, and what they're largely looking for is resonating energy. At the end of the day, if you know how to relate to people and you're okay sharing your authentic self, not your manufactured, highly masked, TV ready self, but you can just be real, then you're going to be fine either way. Do know you don't need to have a community to have an audience, and you don't have to have an audience, like a massive audience, to have a community. So I hope I'm freeing you from any concerns. You have to figure out how to be the master of both. That said, if you'd like to be part of a community where other people get to share the stage and shine, and you are interested in checking out exactly what I'm talking about, then please come join me and my friends in Enlightened Entrepreneurs. It's a really wonderful and genuine space, and it's very supportive for creative entrepreneurs at every point in their journey. Whether you're starting your business and you're just looking for a space to be helped and share what you're working on, or you're very experienced and actually an expert and you want to join the membership so you can share with other people your expertise to gain more visibility and exposure for your business, both options are available. So please come join Enlightened Entrepreneurs. It's on Facebook. That's the one downside for some people. They're like, oh, Brandy, I'd love to join, but it's on Facebook. I don't know what people's problems with Facebook are. Okay, I kind of know, but I don't want to get into it. I love Facebook. I'm a millennial woman. This is where I am. This is where I'm squatting. This is where I'll stay. I'm on Facebook. So come say hi to me there. Thanks for watching until the end. Have a good one. Bye.